Men women of Reddit who went out to buy cigarettes milk and never came back. Do you ever think about the family you left behind? Do you send them money or regret leaving? What made you go? My mother was a prostitute, alcoholic, and addicted to drugs. She left when I was 3 and never came back. My father would tell me that she loved me very much but just wasn't ready or mature enough to have a child. He passed away when I was 16. When that happened, I was able to get in contact with my mother's sister, an aunt to me. She would hang out with me, but when I asked around my mother, she would beat around the bush and say that my mom didn't want me to see her the way she was. I hoped to graduate college and then see my mother, to show her that I did good and be able to talk to her as an adult. But she died right before I turned 22, so I never got to ask her why. But it's easy enough to assume that when the party lifestyle has its hooks in you, those hooks are deep indeed and never really let go. I hope to graduate college and then see my mother, to show her that I did good and be able to talk to her as an adult. You did good, and don't need anyone else's validation to know that. You seem to have a pretty good head on your shoulders. I knew of my mother until the age of around 11. Last time I saw her was 2007 when she came back to my hometown and we drove around. I don't remember anything of the conversation as I was only a young lad then, although I do remember one question. She asked if I loved her or my dad more. A simple enough question. Anyone could answer it. Then the harshness of the situation hit me. Silence. I'd just been asked if I wanted to live with mummy or daddy and never, I repeat, never see the other parent again. I only realize this now, years later, the gravity of that decision. My entire life decided by a simple, 3-letter word. Dad. Best freaking decision. I still am unsure about the reasons she walked out. I've been told it was to avoid her financial situation. She apparently owes my father a little more than £1,000 and a few companies far more. I'd say never knowing a parent is far easier than knowing a parent briefly and never understanding why they left until you're old enough to get a possible answer that might be untrue as it's biased towards the other parent. I don't miss her. I have a nice life where I've just started and now dropping out of university. A loving family as my dad found a wonderful woman and even stepbrothers. So yeah, middle finger to the bee who spawned me. That's a really fricked up question to ask an 11-year-old. Good choice though. My dad walked out on my family when I was about 4. He left us for a woman he'd been sleeping with to get him. I grew up hearing constant fighting in my house. But I remember that day. My mother sounded more terrified and desperate than I'd ever heard her before. I was sitting behind a chair in the living room, and I remember not liking how cold it was. Slamming doors, screaming. They came out and my dad just said he was leaving. I ran to him because I wanted to go too. He literally shut the door in my face and left. I remember the worst part about it was my mom sitting on the floor sobbing. I sat on her lap and told her, "It'll be okay mommy. I love you. I seriously have always wanted to just shut that memory out. Bleh." My grandfather left my dad and his family on my dad's first birthday. So now my dad hates his birthday, and his family kind of hates him because they feel like it was his fault or something. My dad ended up getting an awesome stepdad and kept some contact with his biological dad. Both of them died within a few months of each other a few years ago. There was no funeral for my biological grandfather. My dad wasn't sad at all. When his stepdad died though, he gave the eulogy and it's the only time I've ever seen my dad cry. Like a few others, I'm going to use my grandparents' story, not my own. My grandmother was a stunningly beautiful woman and bad crap crazy. My dad and his siblings all have cross tattoos with Indian ink carved into their hands so she could identify them if they were ever kidnapped and dismembered. And my dad absolutely refused to spank me when I was little because he clearly remembers getting beaten and whipped by her with extension. Ultimately, when his youngest sibling was still an infant, she ran off to be a female wrestler. No, she was never famous and I only know her beginning of her wrestling name, which was Lucius something or another, but her name was Lee, so it was probably something to do with that. She never came back home. Never attempted to reach her children until she was dying and alone. She was treated with the characteristic detachment for the people who have hurt us that we all come by honestly in my family. Her pleas were ignored. My grandfather on the other hand is 82, gets around slowly but surely and is deaf as heck and is spoiled and doted on by all of us. The years have been hard on him. He raised 5 kids on his own. working 3 jobs, sleeping less than 4 hours a night and trying his best to keep my dad out of trouble until he was given the choice of Navy or jail, which he wisely chose Navy. Every one of my grandpa's hard years lines his precious face and I melt just looking at him. Every time I see him he tells me I'm getting prettier and that I'll look just like him. And he always reminds me to lock my doors, lol. I am 7 months pregnant and I am using the beginning of his first name and my daughter's, and I cannot wait to hold my daughter in my arms and pass his namesake to him and hear him say, "Oh Delilah, you're so pretty, you look just like me." Not me, but I was seeing this girl a few years back briefly and her sister had just had a kid and married the dad. While the mom was at work, the dad took the baby to the neighbor and said he was going out for some milk. He drove to the roof of a parking garage and jumped off. I think they were only married for a few weeks, too. Pretty heartbreaking. Very little consolation, but at least he didn't take the kid with him. It's always extra heartbreaking when they decide to take the family out before they take themselves out. Very sad. My uncle told my aunt, my dad's sister, he was going to the city for the day to collect a load of supplies and would be back the next day. When he didn't arrive home, everyone was worried because he just didn't seem like the type of guy to up and leave. The police were called. They could find nothing and he was listed as a missing person. A few years later they found his truck at a pick-a-part place. My dad went through their bank accounts. All good. Not even a late phone bill. Talked to his friends, his workers, everyone, and no one had a clue. My dad hired a private detective, eventually worked out my uncle had been skimming, taking cash in hand from his business. He owned a medium-sized plumbing business for a couple of years and probably had about $200k somewhere. So we sort of knew he had planned it or had gambling debts, but no one had ever seen him bet a penny, so that was discounted. 10 years after he went missing and legally declared dead, he turned up. He said he had been living in Southeast Asia and said he had set up a backpackers bar hostel. He said he left because he just didn't want the responsibility of being a parent and a husband. Totally unremorseful, and invited his kids to come and see him in Southeast Asia. He left an email address and we never heard from him again. His eldest son flew to Southeast Asia to find this guest house, and it did exist but he never owned it. He did tend bar for a couple of years though. Dead end. We don't know how he travels in this day and age with passport technology. We think maybe he somehow got citizenship under the table in a different name. Maybe he is in a bordering country and bribed the custom guards. My aunt is a good woman. With the help of all the family, worked super hard and raised her kids to be thoughtful, kind, educated, productive members of society. My dad has been their dad. Even though we lived overseas for a few years on and off, they visited every vacation. And they call him Pops, and my mum is Auntie, and there was never a lack of love for them and never will be. I love them like my own brothers. In some ways I am way more protective of them because of what their biological dad did to them. Over the years the anger has passed. My aunt finally 18 years later is dating a really nice guy. She never wanted to date when the kids were young. We hope they will have many years of happiness. Not a deadbeat dad, but my dad left when I was 3. I graduated college at 20. He is currently suing, attempting to for custody so he can get my paychecks. One scum, always scum. When I was 22, me and my GF had our first child. A year later I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. After 7-8 months of treatment, the cancer was in remission. You'd think somebody who just beat cancer would be appreciative of everything he has and his health. Not me. I went crazy. One day I quit my job and left my GF and son. Over the next year I pretty much partied every night, drinking and snorting coke. Eventually I wised up with the help of my family and made things right with my ex-GF at the time. We eventually got back together and 2 years later we got married. We've been happily married for 5 years and now have a son and a daughter. I appreciate what I have every day and would never think of leaving my family again. Even though I don't know you, I'm proud of you for owning your frick up, getting clean, and being a dad. For those of you that have never met a parent, my brother and his adopted a baby girl. They got her on Christmas Day. Move ahead about 30 years and she receives a letter from a company that tracks down adopted people. Her birth father had her tracked down and wanted to meet her. As luck would have it, he lived about 50 miles away. They did meet and had a polite time. She said it was like meeting any other stranger. She asked him if he knew where her birth mother was and he didn't give her the information. She called her and talked a bit and mom agreed to meet, but my niece would have to travel more than 1,000 miles to meet her, rent a car and drive to her house. She said the woman asked her very few questions about her, just talked about her terrible life, all her ex-husbands and current husband in prison. She kept answering her cell and talking to whoever instead of her. One call she said was from her daughter. My niece had stepsisters but didn't invite them over to meet her. When she got home she hugged my brother and said thank you for adopting me. I used to work in a nursing home. One guy seemed to be in butthole and I thought it was due to a bad stroke. I said something to the head nurse, no jokes, and she told me she had grown up down the street from the guy. She said he had always been a mean, worthless drunk and was very bad to his wife and kids. The wife finally kicked him out. He got old, had his stroke and the kids dumped him in the home. She said they never came to see him, not even on the big holidays. The home calls them sometimes to get advice or permission and the family gives it without question. The sucker is going to die all alone and it sounded like he deserved it. There's a very cruel woman at my care home where the family refuses to see her. Once the nurse called the daughter for something and she asked to never be called ever again. No one visits this lady. I guess the thing to take away from this is to always be a kind and happy person and your life will be good. Well, I have been on two sides of this story. My dad left when he came to terms of him being gay. When I was 9, he was around off and on, paying child support when he felt like it, but mostly partying very hard, up to and including Crystal M. He is currently very sick and decided that he wanted to be a part of our lives again. So he is. We are a pretty stable, happy family because my mom is a rock star. So he's been forgiven. And oddly, they've remarried and she takes care of him. I left my ex due to lying and drug abuse and he has chosen to become a felon and not take part in his 2 children's lives. Sucks for him. They are awesome. And have the best stepdad in the whole freaking world. I hope they have a nice, big frick you for him when they grow up. But all that really matters is that they are stable and happy and comfortable in a way their father could never provide. They used to tell me how he would let them do insert rule I don't allow and it would kill me because I was single mom working my butt off to give them school clothes, birthdays, Christmas, with zero contribution from him and yet he was still better in their minds because they could junk food on the couch. Serious answer here. My Bill left a wife and 3 kids back in Honduras without telling anyone he was going. He never actually married the woman involved, but they considered themselves husband and wife. He was doing fairly well for himself at the time, by local standards. His mill moved in with them first, then his brother, and there was talk of his father moving in after his mom died. Before any of that could happen however, the wife started an affair with Bill's brother. Eventually she decided she was going to be married to him instead of the father of her children. Started sleeping in the brother's room every night, asking my Bill to move out so there could be a family, and crap like that. Though she still expected him to support his brother, for the kid's sake. Real soul crushing stuff. Bill and his dad decided to get a place of their own as the father was the only person who hadn't known of the affair before Bill found out. They headed to the bank to draw out some savings and the father was stabbed to death 15 feet from the bank's entrance. Bill still had all the cash in hand and thought, what's keeping me here? He hopped a bus, plane, whatever and eventually ended up in America where he met my sister. They are married now, obviously. He thinks about his kids all the time. Sends them $200 to $300 a month, which is quite a lot by Honduran standards. Recently, he hired an immigration lawyer to sort his status out. His eventual plan is to get a green card. As I understand it, his kids get automatic green cards as well so long as they are under a certain age. He wants them to live here, have a better life away from the crime and poverty they are used to. My family has pretty much adopted them as well, though we've never met them. For birthdays, holidays, we all chip in a few bucks so they can have things they otherwise wouldn't. We all pitched in on a couple cell phones for Bill's birthday last year too. He calls them pretty much nightly, and he can send picture video messages and everything now. I only talked with him once about it, but he seemed genuinely torn up about leaving the kids behind. The wife brother, not so much. Not me but my ex-GF. During the middle of dating my ex she confessed that she had 3 daughters to 3 different men and didn't stick around to raise any of them. Then dated a 16-year-old boy when she was 32 because his father was rich. Frick people like that. How could you just walk out on your children in such a fricking selfish manner? Really pisses me off. Why would she even have the babies is the question I have. Well, as I was walking out the door, heading for the shops to get some milk, my wife said drive safely and I replied by saying you too, but she wasn't driving anywhere. She was staying at home. I instantly knew I could never return after that. I mean, even my kids heard it. So I got in the car, drove away and never looked back. I thought my dad left me and my brother when I was 6. My mother told me that he didn't want us and that he was a dangerous man. I had good memories of him, but enough bad ones to make her stories seem believable. It took me 15 years to get up the courage to find him and talk to him. My brother convinced me it was a good thing. He said our mother kept us from him, lied to the courts, returned all the presents and letters he sent us for our birthdays and Christmas. He was so bitter about it that that's all that was left of him. Just a giant ball of hate for a woman that took everything from him. Now I can't look at either of my parents without disgust. What monsters I was bred from. I spent 6 years thinking my grandmother was my mom. Didn't think it was weird that I didn't have a dad. No one mentioned him. Then one day he showed up, said he loved me, said he wanted to take me back to live with him. Even though this man had missed the first 6 years of my life, he acted like he loved me. Thing is, he did. He's spent the last 15 years making it up to me. Turns out he didn't know about me. Tried to kill himself when he found out he had a 6-year-old son. The guilt almost crushed him. Mom though? Mom wasn't there. Popped up every 2 years like clockwork, only to disappear after a week. Never in person. Just over the phone. Now, I'm 21, homeless, and freaking miserable. I blame no one other than myself. But now mom wants to help. Says she's 4 years sober, and wants to be friends. Regrets missing out on my life. I don't know whether or not to believe her. Frick guys. Do I let her in? She's been persistent for 6 months, and so understanding of my inability to trust her. I have trouble trusting anyone, but maybe that needs to change. My cousin's mom went to visit her sister and never came back. She called my uncle a few days later to say that she just couldn't do this anymore and had no contact with them for the next 10 or so years. The fact that you used cousin's mom, as opposed to aunt. I had fricked this girl I met in college exactly one time. I moved away soon after and she contacted me saying that I had a kid. I did the paternity test and the kid was mine. She wanted me to move back to my hometown and be a family with her. She was as freaking crazy though. She was one of those Christians that believes the world is only 3,000 years old or whatever. My mom tried to give my son some Disney movies for him to watch and my kid's mom would not allow it because it was unchristian. She's just a crazy butt. He's almost 8 now and I've wanted him to come visit me multiple times but she won't let him. I guess the way I live my life is no place for a child anyway. I do want to be more a part of his life though. If you're in the United States she can't refuse some parental rights. You do have the right to see your child even if it is a supervised visitation just once or twice a month. But usually you will get more. The courts do not look kindly upon custodial interference. I'd really talk to a lawyer about this. My great-grandfather would do this, and to this day I will never understand why my great-grandmother stayed with him. Papa would go out for milk and end up on a boat bound for Japan shipping cows. He'd send her postcards. One time they went on a cruise with my dad and uncle. They were children, but they remember it well, and Papa got off on one of the stops and didn't get back on until several stops later. No one knows where he'd go. GG. My great-grandmother was a very devout Catholic, so divorce was out of the question, but it drove her out of her mind. Literally, she had to send my grandmother to live with my great-great-grandmother while Gigi stayed in a mental hospital for a few. I didn't learn any of this until after he'd passed. I grew up knowing him as the funny old man with crazy hair who could charm any animal. I was forced to go, not the same, but I can imagine that in a child's eyes, it would appear to be my choice. My ex and I were together for 2+ years, and as much as I had ill feelings for her, the kids I adored. At the time, she had me convinced I was a bad father figure to them. Maybe I was, but I would have gone to heck and back in a heartbeat for them. The last day I spent with them, I cried for hours. Unfortunately, I doubt I can talk to them again, mainly because my ex is a slave to her parents, and to cover her lies about stealing my stuff, I had been prevented from seeing any of them again. I can only speak for myself, but I truly believe that a decision to walk out is never made lightly. It hurts more than anything ever could. Maybe, with the world being so connected, I can see them as they were years later. But I cannot live in that hope because I won't move forward if I do. By bad father figure, I was a big kid myself and not able to establish a lot of authority. And no, not my kids biologically, and their mother stole my items, and upon pursuing getting them back, my ex's parents threatened legal action if I didn't stop. Since I have little money and my family is 1000 km away, and I'm too freaking proud to ask for help, I'm stuck. My mom left when I was 7. If she didn't run, she would most likely have been killed by my father. She deeply regrets leaving the 3 of us with my father. I forgive her because I now understand why she had to leave. My childhood was a thing of horror. Beatings, and worse to this day I wish he beat me rather than the hours of verbal abuse and stuff. That crap doesn't leave easily. A broken bone heals. I am the father of 2 boys. I am in my early 30s. I have not seen my older son for the better part of 2 years, and there is no other reason than being selfish and having a perceived image of him being better off. Backstory: I grew up with a single mother who told me my entire life that my father was a womanizing deadbeat and all men were scum. She has a prescription drug problem and is manic depressive, even going to far as getting locked in a psych ward for weeks on end in my teenage years, leaving me to fend for myself. I grew up thinking no child really needed a father and I was never going to have children. Cue my early 20s, socially apathetic recreational drug user. I met a girl online and through our common misery we wound up living together. A child gets conceived, abortion is contemplated, lots of tears and arguments and changing of minds for both parties. Shortly before he is supposed to be born we break up. He gets born and we decided to give it one more try. It doesn't last 2 weeks past his birth. I do my crap. Drink, work, sleep, drink, work, sleep, get older, wiser, meet another woman, have another son, see my older son sporadically at this point. Keep telling myself that he doesn't need me in his life, that he has a loving family that takes care of him and he doesn't need the steaming pile of resentment and trouble that is daddy's. Get my crap together. Take loving care of my so and younger son. He is the light of my life, but every day he reminds me of how I am failing his older brother. Reach out. Met with backlash and bulls. Get angry and distance myself more. Current day. Keep my distance now. Try to call once in a while. Try to convince myself that I should get involved. Inevitably avoid it after long inner monologues through which I create self-serving bulls reasons that don't do anything but feed my fear of negative backlash. I know that I can fix this and that I should fix this. Fear and selfishness about the life that I have worked to build are standing in my way. I don't need pity. I have plenty of that for myself. This has been cathartic. Daddy loves you, B. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.